Hello, welcome back to Shocks Talks, and welcome to all the new subscribers. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Shakti, and I research anomalous phenomena. I'm an experiencer of some interesting and strange things. I've been seeking answers for years. I've gone down the UFO rabbit hole, alien lore, remote viewing history, secret government programs, the long-standing cover-up. I go to UFO conferences, and mostly I just read tons of books on this topic. And on this channel, I do little book reports. I discuss things that are happening in UAP UFO news today. And also, I do my own experiments around psi and consciousness. And right now, I'm focused on the out of body experience. But today, we're going to take a little break from the OBE stuff and focus on the Others, which is the new book that just came out from Diana Walsh Pasulka. It's been out for a little while, but I just got my copy recently, and I'm only a chapter away from finishing this book. But today I'm only going to talk about the first half of it because it's so rich. And if I tried to cover it all in one episode, this could end up being like over an hour long. I also wanted to tell you all that I just got to see Chris Ramsey live in Los Angeles at the El Rey Theater for his tour, It's Probably Nothing. And if you don't know Chris Ramsey, his podcast is Area 52. He's a really fun creator in this space, and he does such great work diving into the UFO and alien topic, but he's also such an interesting person to observe as an interviewer, because what I've noticed about him is that he really creates a lot of space for his guests to be themselves, to express themselves fully. He really listens. I mean, there's a lot of podcasters out there who will end up just taking over, and half the time I find myself wishing Chris was talking more, because I actually do want to hear what he thinks. So I just think he's a very great person to follow. If you haven't already started to check out his work, go ahead and check out Area 52. Oh no, my cats are playing with the camera setup. Get down, Joopy. Stop it. There's always cat drama, you guys. There's always creature drama. Before, it was my dog Jet years ago. He's only been on the other side for a year, but in my older videos, you'll hear him tiptoeing around, making little noises, and bumping into the camera stand. And now I've got Orin and Jupiter, and they will always wake up from their slumber to disturb me when I'm trying to record. Oh my God. Anyway, so I just had a ton of fun. Typically I'm located in New Mexico. Currently I'm in LA through the year for work. So this is my beautiful corporate housing that you're seeing in the background. And by day, I'm a creative director. I'm an artist. I work in arts and entertainment, but this is just my passion project. So I just really want to give a big thank you to everyone that does subscribe to the channel, and especially those who comment. It just means a lot to me, all of you who have chosen to give me that gift of a subscription. It's free for you, of course. And if you like to be notified of when videos come out, I post once a week in terms of the long form videos, because that's all I have time for right now with my full-time job. And I'm starting to post shorts, and also in the community section on this website, there's kind of a little news feed where I'm starting to post pictures and talk about what's coming up on the next episode, or just cool things that I've done. So you can see my pictures from It's Probably Nothing over on that community section. And feel free to post something cool if you want to participate in the Anomalous Study Hall and share with our community like what you're reading, what you're learning about, or what you're experimenting with. Just keep it respectful and keep it on topic. That would be awesome. I do all my research by reading, and I use my own brain to take my own notes, either by hand or in my own computer. It's tedious, but I do this because I'm very interested in developing my own consciousness and my own mind through this process of reading and learning. And that's a big part of what this channel is all about. And it's a big part of what we're going to learn about in the book, The Others, today. There's a lot of discussion of AI in this book, and it's kind of bringing me back to the work of Dr. Joanna Kujawa. You can look up my episode on her. Alien Goddess is her book. And a lot of people are talking about this quiet turning point that we're all in right now. And you can feel it. I know we can all feel it and sense it. And we can see that this takeover is happening in terms of this new technology sort of infiltrating all of the aspects of our lives. This book gets into some of the effects and implications, along with some of the predictions from the past that have hinted at the reality that we're in right now. Check out my playlist section, and I'll shut up now about the channel and just get into the book report. But thank you so much for being here. Okay, The Others. So this book by Diana Walsh Pasulka, the author of Encounters, which I've also covered in a book report episode on Shocks Talks. The subtitle here is UFOs, AI, and the Secret Forces Guiding Human Destiny. Those secret forces which are guiding human destiny is the important thing to really think about here. Some of them seem to be very specific and contrived, and others seem to be an emerging momentum that is the result of so many different factors. And I think that's kind of what she's dancing around throughout this entire book. Pasulka's writing is really fun. You feel like you're with her on her adventure out there in the world, meeting different people, attending different events, researching, referring back to all of these, what do you call them? Sources. They're like original sources. There's like a real name for this in academia, but it's just not coming to me right now. Anyway, she's a professor of religious studies, and so she has a really intelligent mind, and the way that she organizes this book is not only fun and entertaining, but it is also very academic. And if you don't like spoilers, then save this episode for after you've read the book, because I'm going to go pretty in depth in terms of what she's talking about here. The beginning of this starts with this idea of a reluctant messenger, and she tells the story of Jonah. So she's going back and forth between these Catholic visionaries and Arthur C. Clarke's story, Childhood End, which I have not read, but I really am curious about after reading this book. So this Childhood End story is about children who are absorbed into an alien hive mind, and she weaves in and out of all these other conversations and experiences. She kind of always comes back to this story as she goes through this book, and then later she starts to dig into the work of Marshall McLuhan, and she kind of compares both of these things in terms of their prophecy nature and how they're predicting the onset of this social media network, AI, and this internet kind of hive mind that we might be slipping into right now. Catholic visionaries and science fiction. We are living through a moment that earlier generations could only imagine. Artificial intelligence is reshaping how we live, and reports of non-human intelligence are regularly debated in U.S. congressional hearings. This book focuses on a group of visionaries from the first half of the 20th century who anticipated this moment: Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, René Girard, Marshall McLuhan, and Mark Stallman. These thinkers produced insights that now appear unmistakably prophetic. Each foresaw transformations in human culture, technology, and spirituality that have become fully legible only in the contemporary age of AI and UFOs. They described what is now visibly unfolding. Alongside them stands Arthur C. Clarke, who was not conventionally religious, but whose science fiction novel Childhood End offers a pop culture rendering of the same future these visionaries anticipated. So she goes on to say that they're describing the emergence of a new human being, one inseparable from technology. And McLuhan, the scholar of media technology, described this as a supra-terrestrial order. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Catholic priest and paleontologist, described the new human as the ultra-human, who would be connected to the noosphere, a planetary layer of cognition overlaying the biosphere, energized by technology, new economic forms, and shared thought. McLuhan argued that technological environments shape human consciousness, making his supra-terrestrial a close echo of Chardin's noosphere. She also pulls in the work of Dr. Jacques Vallée. Many years ago, I met Dr. Jacques Vallée, known both as a computer scientist and a ufologist. Vallée worked in the 1970s on the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, ARPANET, the proto-internet that laid the foundation for today's digital networks. At the same time, he pursued research on UFOs, compiling cases that challenged the conventional nuts and bolts spacecraft narrative. When I met Jacques, I sensed that these two domains, computer networking and the study of anomalous phenomena, were not coincidental in his life, though I did not fully grasp their connection. Over time, the picture clarified. Both ARPANET and the UFO phenomena point to distributed intelligence. The internet functions as a graph, each node, computer, capable of transmitting and transforming information without a central point of control. Vallée suggested that UFOs behave in a strikingly familiar fashion, not as a singular craft from a distant planet, but as an information system, a network of signs and encounters that adapt to and change the cultural expectations of those who witness it. So now we're starting to talk about how these systems or networks have a transformative effect on humankind, and that's where she ends up about midway through the book as well. Also, an interesting note, this book is dedicated to Jeffrey Kripal, who she talks about a bit later on. And Kripal is an American religious studies scholar. He's the chair in philosophy and religious thought at Rice University in Houston, Texas. And he's the co-founder of the GEM program. That's GEM, Gnosticism, Esotericism, and Mysticism. Also, he founded the Archives of the Impossible, a special collection at Rice University, which is their collection dedicated to UFOs, paranormal subjects, and includes papers by Jacques Vallée, a lot of the declassified U.S. Army Stargate project materials, correspondence sent to Whitley Strieber after the publication of Communion, and materials related to John Mack. This is all from Wikipedia on Jeffrey Kripal. And I learned that this collection in Houston, Texas at Rice University has more than 1 million documents. So that's pretty cool. I've heard of the Archives of the Impossible, but I hadn't made that connection in my mind that that's what Jeffrey Kripal helped to create. So interesting that this book is also dedicated to him. So towards the beginning, she's going into this Jonah story. She's starting to talk a little bit about Childhood End. She gives a roadmap to the book on page 10. And I was going to look at that again. So throughout this book, she's weaving the work of René Girard, who she mentioned in that first introduction. He's a French academic who, through the course of his research into the classics of the Western tradition, converted to Catholicism. Girard is not the most dramatic of the visionaries, but his contribution is the most crucial. He holds a mirror to the past and present and reveals the patterns of violence and desire that govern much of human interaction. In so doing, he warns us of what lies ahead. In terms of these networks and systems that are shaping us, maybe silently even, or at least quietly, she cites Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics, which is the science of feedback theory and signal processing. And his warning is, if we use to achieve our purposes a mechanical agency with whose operation we cannot efficiently interfere, we had better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire. Without discernment, machines will scale our worst impulses into systems of violence. This is so poignant and very much along the lines of Joanna Kujawa's warnings and her work, considering AI and where we're headed as a culture. So what they're all getting at, and what Diana Walsh Pasulka digs into as she goes deeper into this journey with us, is how these tools are being created, who's behind them. This is part of the conversation surrounding AI right now. A lot of people are feeling like, we know that this is a beautiful, powerful tool with potential positive implications. However, we are very skeptical of the people who are shaping these tools, programming them, and how they're being inserted into this greed and power driven capitalist, colonialist, Western patriarchal culture that we're still currently living in. And that's the problem. And that's exactly what Norbert Wiener is saying here. Basically, that we need to be really careful about what we're putting into these machines. Only Clarke maintained unshaken optimism. Girard, Chardon, McLuhan, and even Wiener, in different registers, all recognize that humanity approaches an apocalyptic horizon in which technological power will confront us with the necessity of what some have called a sanctifying grace. She goes on to say that the implication here is that only a society whose members have developed a spiritual sense can guide us through what lies ahead. So we'll get deeper into that later in the book as well. But unfortunately, what we're going to learn is that those spiritual senses, according to some, are shaped and cultivated in early childhood. And we are now currently living through a time where social media and technology is blocking the ability for some young people to develop the spiritual senses that will be needed to guide us through the coming time. For the first time in human history, technology will potentially reshape this faculty across entire populations. On the spiritual sense. The spiritual sense achieves the status of a character in the book as the religious visionaries, as well as the people featured, attest to its action in their lives. While every culture has built tools that shape how it encounters the sacred, like icons, cathedrals, radio, movies, etc., the inner ability to perceive the sacred has remained the same. Injury, drugs, and trauma could distort this sense in individuals. Thus, most religious traditions advocate for a care of the body as means to protect this sense or faculty. For the first time in human history, technology will potentially reshape this faculty across entire populations. This is really interesting to me because I grew up in a yogic tradition, in an ecumenical ashram setting, where cultivating our spiritual faculties at a young age was at the top of everyone's list of priorities. And so I wonder how different it is for people who are living completely without that compared to what I've experienced, which is an emphasis on the spiritual faculties at a young age, which has served me all throughout my life. And the idea that not only can drugs or trauma stunt this ability to develop, but that the very social media and technology that we are developing now is creating in young people a need for constant dopamine hits, which not only leads to too much screen time and too much involvement with the technology that we have developed, but it also perpetuates drug use among young people, because when they're not using their screens to get that dopamine hit, they're seeking out other means to that same end. So I am seeing that in the people I know, at least, that this does seem to be happening with younger generations. And I'm constantly surprised at how prevalent drug use is. Not to say that I haven't done my fair share in my life, because I absolutely have. And it has its place. And I think that we can all heal and evolve beyond these things. But I do find it suspicious when it appears that there are mass manipulation tactics at play, and that perhaps the cultivation of the technology in the way that we're seeing it develop does have a direct correlation with the increase in drug use in the younger populations. Early in this book, she talks about this Hereticon event that she goes to, sponsored by Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, and the theme is apocalypse, and she'll revisit this theme throughout the book. She talks about Thiel's keynote speech on the Antichrist and the apocalypse. As the discussion came to a close, it was clear that Thiel sought to elevate eschatology, considerations of what is commonly known as the end times, from the realm of cliché and caricature into a space of serious political and philosophical reflection. He had been workshopping this talk, readying it for prime time. This had to be, in itself, a historical moment with respect to the discourse surrounding the Antichrist, which, for good or bad, had been carried out within local, non-denominational churches and even stigmatized by many theologians in the mainstream Anglican and Catholic churches. A buzz of voices erupted after the talk as people scrambled out of the theater to go to lunch. Thiel's assessment appeared to be that the Antichrist could be a person or it could be a system, but it was definitely an offer of comfort and conformity over the pain of genuine conflict that accompanies contemporary national states of affairs. Perhaps this global government was something like the World Economic Forum. She was also surprised that Thiel had not elaborated on the potential for digital media, specifically social media, to occupy the role of the Antichrist. As a student of Girard, I would have thought that he would see the inherently mimetic nature of social media, a system designed to amplify imitation, rivalry, and escalation. Later in the book, she talks with some Catholic nuns who are telling her about the children and their phones in school and how it's impossible to get them off their phones. They're not allowed to take them away. The parents are on their phones all the time, and they're seeing increasingly disturbing evidence of cyberbullying, where kids will get together and they'll target a specific kid that they want to bully, and they'll do it through social media, which is just horrifying to think about. I hear little stories of this crossing the news and in the background of reality, but it's so far from my current reality because I don't have kids of my own, and I can't imagine growing up in that kind of social atmosphere, how stressful that would be. And it is so horrible for some kids that it's driving them to suicide. The worst of the platforms enact a kind of algorithmic violence. Research studies on the brains of youth are unsettling. There is a correlation between social media use and adverse brain development. One of the things that Pasulka considers throughout this book is the ways in which science fiction can predict and also shape the future. And I find this so interesting in relationship to consciousness theories like Tom Campbell's. And even some of the episodes of the telepathy tapes where they get into creativity and where ideas come from, the idea of genius and what that really means at its root. And basically this notion that creative concepts are being pulled out of this collective subconscious or this larger consciousness system, filtered through individuals or groups to be formed into these works of art or books, stories, myths that then go on to shape the culture. In Pasulka's book, she says examples of science fiction that have predicted real technologies abound. Jules Verne in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, 1870, famously predicted and inspired a sea vehicle that would become the submarine approximately 100 years later. His Nautilus was powered by electricity, had a pressurized hull, and a navigation system. In his From the Earth to the Moon, 1865, Verne also predicted that the rocket and spacecraft would launch from Florida, near Cape Canaveral. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, widely regarded as the first work of science fiction, not only predicted genetic engineering, organ transplantation, and synthetic biology, but most significantly, she predicted the ethical and moral issues accompanying the use of such technologies. According to Quiliano and Kripal, there is more to science fiction than being just explanatory stories. Quiliano argues that both prophecy and science fiction function as tools for shaping reality. They argue that science fiction does not merely reflect cultural narratives, but actively influences human knowledge and societal evolution by enabling people to envision alternate future possibilities. Okay, later on, she's starting to tie in this idea of the forces that are shaping our future, the prophetic messages that are coming from science fiction, and this idea of the Antichrist. So she returns to the Childhood End story, saying that Childhood End aligns with the Antichrist narrative of deception, wherein even the best of us is fooled. It does not warn of an external tyranny. It reveals the inward colonization of spiritual intuition. Out of everything I underlined in this first half of the book, I think this quote right here might be one of the most important, and it really sums up what she's getting at here. This is the watch out. We need to watch out for the inward colonization of spiritual intuition. Because remember, it is that spiritual intuition that we need to be able to navigate what is imminent. Clark's novel stages a future in which belief is no longer necessary because the very thing that once required belief, the recognition of a spiritual connection to the sacred, is reinterpreted and replaced with a connection to an alien network. Interiority to the sacred disappears and is supplanted by a direct connection to the alien species. And this is where she brings it back to Marshall McLuhan, because that alien in the story may not be an external alien, but actually this alien is our own creation. Through our technological advancement, we are creating this force, this shaping force that is hijacking our interior spiritual realities and our own connections to ultimate truth. McLuhan predicted that the nature of this new environment would be all-encompassing and impervious to most, if not all, attempts to mediate it. More from McLuhan, he often states that human beings will be completely unprepared for AI's disruption. In 1969, he said, "If you have difficulty envisioning something as trivial as the imminent end of elections, you'll be totally unprepared to cope with the prospect of the forthcoming demise of spoken language and its replacement by a global consciousness." So going back to that part about the kids and technology and the spiritual senses, I think, again, this is one of the most important things for us to keep track of here, because as we continue to connect with and allow our own technological creations into our lives, we are inviting that shaping to occur. And this is something I think about a lot as a student of the great mysteries myself. If I were to simply go to any of the AI chatbots right now and say, give me a summary of Diana Walsh Pasulka's book, give me the Cliff's Notes, and then I would just copy and paste those bullet notes and have AI turn it into a script for me, and then I would read that script on my YouTube channel, you would probably get something that was in some ways more comprehensive than what you're getting here from me. But my purpose here is to actually learn myself. So I'm not interested in outsourcing that learning to the AI. I would rather be messy and struggle through the process of, first of all, reading in the first place, which is time consuming and difficult. And sometimes these things just slip right out of my mind, just like as if they're falling through a colander. And in order to create that stickiness where I can grasp the concepts that I'm even taking in, I go through and I underline and I take notes and I make these episodes, because this process is what allows me to continue to contemplate these concepts and to be able to discuss them with other people in an interesting way. It's not easy, but I want to encourage all of us to take the hard route as much as possible when it comes to learning ourselves, and not outsource all of that learning to the technology, because we are going to see our own minds begin to atrophy if we continue to let the computers do all the work for us. I know we have to sometimes tap into that help and assistance, and we have to keep up with the culture, and we have to move at these crazy rates because of capitalism, but it's okay to be messy, it's okay to be imperfect, and it's okay to be on a learning journey. You're never in the wrong place. You're always improving, you're always learning, you're always growing. Not everything is meant to be summarized into a 7-second TikTok lesson. Towards the end of the first half of this book, Pasulka says, I had just related some of the research I'd read about the correlation between scrolling and its impacts. The research shows that endless scrolling on social media is correlated with heightened dopamine-driven reward cycles, reduced attention spans, and altered patterns of brain development in young people, making sustained focus and discernment more difficult. At some point, the spiritual senses, and there are a few of them, cannot withstand certain brain injury or atrophy. So this is going back to that part about how, according to some of these scholars of Thomas Aquinas, they believe that the spiritual senses are cultivated at this early age, and that the technology is blocking the ability for young people to develop those senses when they are constantly scrolling and therefore actually doing damage. Mark describes the digital sphere not as a new civilization, but as an autonomous psychotechnological entity. It possesses a sovereignty that is unprecedented and that supersedes nation states and globalism, both of which are powerless to resist. Just as digital systems now mediate human perception, sacred architecture once mediated divine encounter. Okay, now we're zooming out, back out into how these systems and structures are shaping us. And she's comparing this technological infrastructure to the physical creations that were designed to shape our spiritual encounters, which is such a cool concept. You know, if you've walked into any sacred temple or cathedral or even art installation, how powerful shape, form, color, and material can be in terms of having an impact on your psyche, which is processing all this data that's coming in from the sensual, physical matter reality world. Now we live not only in this physical world, but in this digital landscape where the architecture of that space could be shaping our spiritual senses and more. We'll do part 2 in another episode. But for anyone who wants to get this book, I do highly recommend it. It's a great read. Again, audiobook is awesome too. This is The Others by D.W. Pasulka. And if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And please do like and share the episode. Help me grow this channel, grow the Anomalous Study Hall. Post what you're doing as an experiment in your own anomalous studies, or what books you find most interesting and useful. Maybe it's something I haven't read yet and I can cover on the channel. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you next time on Shocks Talks.